Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Brothers, sisters, respected elders, Assalamu alaikum. I'm hopefully going to be saying a few words which probably be aware of many of the issues and the challenges, and inshallah, when we get a chance to speak at some point, I hope to learn a lot from all of you here today. You know, it was, and just to clarify, I'm not a scholar. There are so many excellent scholars here, I'm sure. I'm just an ordinary, simple Muslim who was privileged to have got involved in politics. I was a member of Parliament in Tony Blair's government, and then I was a minister in Gordon Brown's government. Alhamdulillah, the first Muslim minister in the UK and the first elected in the Western world, or the Muslim minority world. It's a privilege and honour to be here. It's the first time that I've come to South Africa, and they said, we want to start your visit here with the best part of South Africa. And so I'm here in Cape Town with you. And mashallah, it's absolutely beautiful, and the people have been tremendous, incredibly hospitable. You know, it was a chap called Lenin who said that there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen. And I think we're privileged that we've lived and live in an era when we can honestly say that there are weeks when decades have happened. Who would have thought that Reagan and Gorbachev would shake hands, perestroika ensue, the Berlin Wall come tumbling down? Who would have thought that Mandela and de Klerk would shake hands and apartheid come tumbling down? Who would have thought that at the time Arafat and Rabin would shake hands and bring hope to the Middle East? Who would have thought that Trimble, Adams and Hume would sign something called the Good Friday Agreement, which thus far has brought peace to Northern Ireland? Who would have thought that Gaddafi, Ali Abdullah Saleh, Ben Ali, Mubarak would all be swept away in a revolution in the Middle East? Who would have thought that a black man would be elected to the White House in the US, not once as president, but twice? And who would have thought that in 2019, a third-rate reality TV star who believes that hatred and bigotry are adequate substitutes for substance, policies and intelligence could become the leader of the so-called free world? I speak, of course, about our brother Donald Trump. Thus proving, I think, that change isn't always a positive thing. But I think we know that change isn't always a positive thing. Who would have thought, after the loss of 6 million Jewish lives in Europe, Europe would once more witness the horrors of hatred and nationalism, as we saw in Bosnia, in Kosovo and elsewhere? Who would have thought that in this enlightened millennium that we were told about, we would see things like 9/11, 7/7, Istanbul, Madrid, Bali, Paris, the list goes on? Who would have thought that Syria would suffer the equivalent of 160 9/11 attacks? Who would have thought that the Swiss would ban minarets, the French would ban the niqab? And in this enlightened millennium, who would have thought that more than 1.3 billion people would live on less than $1.25 a day, 70% of them women, and that every 4 to 5 seconds a child would die because of poverty-related issues? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And every year 4 million would die from HIV, AIDS, malaria, and that for over 50 million children there would be no primary school in this world. Why does all that matter? Because it's a kind of context setting for the world in which we live today, an increasingly interdependent, interconnected world, where something that happens thousands of miles away can impact on our lives in the UK or indeed in South Africa. Issues such as climate change, resource scarcity, epidemic diseases and terrorism do not respect national or international borders. And guess what? You can build as many walls as you like from Mexico to Jerusalem and Bethlehem. But these are not solutions. Instead, they are powerful symbols of abject failure. And so if we can help just one person in a different part of the globe, or indeed in our own neighbourhood, we help ourselves. And of course, as Muslims, our job on this planet is to serve and to save and to help and to support humanity. And I have to say, we're blessed by an accident of fate to live in some of the richest countries in the world. And so as well as being morally obliged, it's actually in our own vested interest to fight poverty, disease, injustice, whether it exists at home or abroad. And one of the themes I want to really speak about is complacency. Complacency is perhaps the biggest risk that many Muslims in different parts of the world have, and it's equally true in South Africa. You know, before 9/11, the Muslims in the USA, they were living the American dream. They were untouchable, the most affluent, the most educated. And yet, after 9/11, their fortunes completely reversed in many ways. And that was a huge shock and wake-up call. Because although they had economic power, they had no political power. And they then realised the importance of politics. And anybody who doesn't think politics is important is really underestimating the power of politics, and perhaps is not contributing to the way forward in the way that is required in countries like South Africa and elsewhere. And I know that you've got your elections coming up shortly, and it's my belief that everybody should participate in those elections, and that there should be healthy debate without it being personalised, unfortunately, quite often, as is the case. My point is this: in South Africa, alhamdulillah, it seems to me as an outsider, and I'm happy to be corrected, that Muslims are amongst the most affluent, are amongst the most educated. And from that can come a kind of complacency, that we've got it relatively good, and it will stay this way. Nothing stays this way. Everything changes. In life, in business, everywhere, things change. And the people who suffer the most are those who are complacent. And the complacent ones are usually the ones for whom life is good at the moment. And so my challenge in many ways to all of you guys is to think about this idea of complacency. You know, when things are going good, that is the time you need to engage with other people who perhaps are not doing so good. That is the time you need to invest in reaching out to other peoples who are different from you. And I look at the UK and I see some of the challenges there, and they are very, very large challenges. The Muslims in the UK are perhaps about 5%. I guess you guys are perhaps 3 to 4%. In South Africa, probably not much more than that. Some similarities there. But I'll just give you an example. And this anecdote will hopefully make people think without me having to explain too much. It goes back to when I was first selected to stand for Parliament in the UK, in a town which some of you I know are familiar with, Dewsbury. And, you know, a number of people approached me. I was obviously trying to reach out to everybody, irrespective of religion. But it happened to be that when I met certain Muslims, they asked me some questions. So the first question was, where are you from? And I said, well, Burnley. I mean, that's the town where I was born. No, where are you from? I said, okay, you mean where are my parents from? I said, okay. I said, parents from Pakistan. Okay, Pakistan. Azad Kashmir, Punjab, Sindh, Baluchistan. I said, okay. Punjab, although originally from occupied Kashmir. He said, okay, thank you. Just one more thing. I said, yeah. You're a Muslim? I said, yeah. Okay, good. Brother, Shia or Sunni? I said, well, I don't know how this is relevant to me standing for Parliament. I'm not standing for a religious Parliament. I'm standing to represent all the people irrespective of faith in my constituency. I said, but okay, Sunni. Okay, brother, thank you. Okay, just one more thing. Yeah. Sufi, Brelvi, Deobandi, Salafi. I said, are you serious? He said, yeah. And by the way, just one more thing in addition. I said, okay. In Pakistan, your ancestors, which clan do they belong to? Gujjar, Jat, Arai? And the list went on. And I thought, wow, we are less than 5% in the UK. Tiny. Yet we're dividing ourselves up into hundreds of little pieces. How can we possibly achieve anything in this country if we can't even unite behind one thing? La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. What hope is there if we can't even do that? And I've got to tell you, this is not just an issue for the UK. This is an issue everywhere. When you're a minority like that and you start to divide yourself, don't blame the British. Yes, you can say we were the kings of divide and rule, but you're free people now, wherever you are in the world. It's up to you. You want to divide yourselves, do so. But there's no compulsion to divide yourself. It's an act of suicide in many ways. So my first real, I suppose, challenge is the challenge of complacency. Things are good, alhamdulillah. So this is the time where you build bridges, where you integrate, where you help others. And when times are tough, and they'll come. Look, if you go back to 1938, nobody would have thought that in less than 2 years, a program of genocide would start in Germany, ultimately gassing some 6 million Jews and 6 million others. Nobody would have thought that was possible. But it happened. I'm not saying anything like that, inshallah, is going to happen here. Inshallah, it won't, of course. But what I'm saying is, complacency is really the enemy of any peoples. The second issue is one of unity. I'm not saying absolute unity. That's, that's really in fantasy world. But relative unity. Of course we can disagree. It doesn't have to be personal. So why, instead of focusing on those areas where we disagree, why don't we focus on those areas where we agree? Because those areas are huge and they're important. But yet quite often we focus on those areas which are insignificant and minute. It's a challenge for everybody, not just South Africa. A challenge everywhere. And I'd say this also, that, and again, this is not a Muslim issue. It's a general human issue. But you know what? Our religion teaches us, as do other religions, to think in different ways, to express our love and affection, to be fair and to be honest. And I think we need to be happy much more for each other, not just happy for ourselves. So when people like Brother Rahman here, who's heading up Islamic finance practically in South Africa, is doing so well, I don't try to bring him down. I think, alhamdulillah, what a wonderful thing. How can I support him? Not how can I bring him down? Or if somebody else's child has done well somewhere, we should be happy. We shouldn't feel any negative thoughts. This, unfortunately, is a human trait that almost everybody has somewhere. But decent people, and certainly people who believe in Islam, they're able to manage those thoughts. They come. Those instincts are always going to be there. I'd say here in South Africa, and let me just apologise in advance if I offend anybody. Obviously my objective here is not to offend people. I'm pretty ignorant with respect to South Africa, so I'm speaking about things that perhaps I don't fully understand, and I'll be happily corrected later. But you know, this unity thing also, I've spoken about some of the divisions, and we know that, for example, there are some African Muslims who feel that they're not fully accepted. It doesn't matter if it's a reality or not, it's a perception. If you have a perception, that is your reality. It's no use me saying otherwise. I have to deal with your reality if I care about you. If I don't care about you, then who cares? We'll just ignore it. You know, we cannot allow anywhere any Muslim to feel as if they're somehow second class in Islam. I'm not saying it's a legitimate belief, but it is a belief that exists in some quarters, and it needs to be addressed. Equally, it's my belief that we cannot allow any of our sisters and mothers and aunts and others to feel that somehow their rights in Islam aren't practiced in the way they should be because of some cultural norms or some traditions that perhaps don't fit in exactly with how we understand Islam. These are all challenges. How can you successfully integrate into the wider world if you don't have relative commonality, understanding and unity within? And let me give you the example of the UK. And actually, in some ways, it's not that different to South Africa. We have spatial segregation, voluntary. What does that mean? That means there are lots of areas where only Muslims live and lots of areas where non-Muslims live. Obviously, if we're less than 5% of the population Muslims, then there's going to be many areas which will never, ever interact with a Muslim. And that's quite dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Well, for many people, they will never interact with Muslims. So what defines Islam and Muslims for them? In their living rooms every day they have TVs, and they look at those TV channels, and there they watch the news. And something like 2/3 of the time, when religion is discussed in the news, that religion in the UK is Islam. So 5% of the population, maybe 65% of the news media, when it discusses religion, is discussing the religion of 5% of the people. And I've got to say that nearly 98%, and maybe I'm being generous, 98% of the time, that 65% is very, very negative. It's all about terrorism, about extremism, maybe about honour killings, etc., etc. Drug gangs, unfortunately in the UK, a big issue. Our jails, Muslims are doing very well in jails, alhamdulillah. These are big challenges. But the point is, for those people who've never met Muslims, what is a Muslim for them? A Muslim for them is what they see on their TV screens. So don't blame them. Do not blame them for thinking negatively. It's a natural human thing to do. But how do we overcome that? We overcome that by engaging, and of course this is the way that Islam was spread, by being ambassadors for Islam, by understanding the religion but then living the religion. Too many people think, sadly, and I've seen in my lifetime, think that Islam is about praying 5 times a day for 5 minutes a day. That's their Islam. Of course that's Islam, but that isn't all of Islam. That isn't even the most of Islam in many ways. How you live your life, how you set an example for others, how you help and support one another, including non-Muslims, that is the real test, it seems to me, about what being a Muslim is. Not even a good Muslim, but just being a Muslim. And so I think these are huge, huge challenges that we all have to try to deal with. And I don't think it's easy at all. In fact, it's very difficult. And it's very difficult because none of us wants to accept sometimes that we have these challenges. We'd rather put our head in the sand and pretend that it doesn't exist. Or it's okay, Shahid Malik speaking there, but he doesn't understand anything. Because actually it's very different. Maybe it is, but equally, maybe it isn't. And as I said, it's about perception and reality. And you mustn't ever underestimate somebody's perception or dismiss somebody's perception. I'll give you an anecdote now, which hopefully spells out some of this, and it goes back to the UK. Shortly after 9/11, I was doing a radio phone-in. So you'll be familiar with them. Somebody rings in, and they say whatever they've got to say, and the people who sat there respond. So somebody rang in, and there was a chap from a place called Oldham in the north of England. And he rang in, and he said, do you not think it's a disgrace that the Scottish can celebrate their culture, the Welsh can celebrate their culture, the Irish can celebrate their culture? What about the English? Why can't we? And I said to him, I said, brother, as a fellow Englishman, tell me, what do you want to celebrate? Because I want to celebrate with you. And he said, but do you not think it's a disgrace that the Scottish can celebrate their culture, the Welsh can celebrate their culture, the Irish can celebrate their culture? What about the English? And I said, brother, I heard what you said. All I'm asking is, what is it that you want to celebrate? Because I genuinely, I want to celebrate with you. He said, so you're saying it's not a disgrace that the Scottish can celebrate their culture, the Welsh can celebrate their culture, the Irish can celebrate their culture, and the English we can't? I said to him, I said, brother, I think you don't really know what you want to celebrate. At that point, he was cut off, and off he went, because it's a phone-in. And actually, we dismiss that person from Oldham at our peril. There are people in our neighbourhoods, in our communities, in our societies, who feel they're being denied something. If you ask them, they can't articulate it. If you ask them, they can't define it. If you ask them, they can't verbalise it. But by God, they are being denied something. And that leaves a kind of psychological vacuum. And if we don't fill that vacuum with the good values that certainly exist here and exist in the non-Muslim part of this country as well, then we've got some real challenges. So perception is absolutely critical. Now, I've got a 4-hour speech I've got to do in about 25 minutes, so I'm going to skip a little bit. You know, it's a very dangerous thing to give a mic to a politician. You know? It's very hard to get it back off them. I'm constrained by Jumuah, which even I must respect and do. But I'll skip a few things and just speak about some of the things that I think are, from my own experience in the UK. I mean, I know a thing or two about tough neighbourhoods. Obviously, I don't think I can compare it to some of the shacks that I saw from the airport coming into the city. But I was born in a ward in Burnley, which had the 6th highest poverty rate out of 8,414 wards. 5 of the people I went to school with are no longer with us. 4 died from drug overdoses, 1 shot in the head from a drug deal that went wrong. When I was elected as the Member of Parliament for Dewsbury, the British National Party, which wants Muslims out of the UK, got its highest ever vote in the country in Dewsbury. And 2 months later, the lead bomber on the 7th of July, Mohammed Sadiq Khan, turned out to be one of my constituents. So I understand a little bit about tough neighbourhoods. Of course, I went on to be the minister who had responsibility for helping to fight extremism, as well as local government minister, justice minister, international development minister, and interior minister. But what I want to say is, what I said to Muslims following the 7/7 attacks was straightforward. You have nothing to apologise for. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You know, the last bomber before the 7/7 bombers was a chap called David Copeland. He bombed Brixton, he bombed Soho, and he bombed Brick Lane. He killed 3, he maimed and injured over 80. He doesn't represent or reflect white Christian opinion, any more than these vile four individuals on the 7th of July represented Islam. You know, Timothy McVeigh in the US killed 168 people in Oklahoma. And he doesn't represent the people of Oklahoma, white people, or Protestants. Similarly, Anders Breivik, who said he was a soldier of Christianity, killed 77 people in Norway. He doesn't represent Christianity. And I think that's the message we've got to give. Evil people do things, but they don't represent a religion. They're just evil people. And this conflation is very, very dangerous. The conflation between Islam, or any religion, and terrorism and extremism. And it's our job to break that bridge that some people purposely put. And you can't break it if you stand silent. After 7/7, I was out, the most vocal person on TV everywhere. I was a Muslim. I'm very proud of that fact, never hidden it. He was my constituent. And for sure, my actions helped in stopping people believe that somehow, wrongly, perversely, that Muslims supported this act. Imagine if Muslims stayed quiet. Then automatically, A, there would be perhaps a belief that started to be created that somehow there's a linkage. And B, the enemies of Islam, the Islamophobes, would obviously point at it and say, look, they're all the same. So let me make it clear, we get fed up sometimes of criticising terrorism just because, what a stupid thing, of course I don't support terrorism. So why must I keep saying it again and again and again? But for the sake of a bit of energy expended, if it gives peace and comfort to some people, it's not a big deal. Yes, I shouldn't have to say it. But if it helps, I'm happy to say it. But I do think we need to stand up always and not be embarrassed by these things because they're not our things. These people are out of Deen, they're in a different place. They're not with us. And we shouldn't hesitate in saying that. And you've got to remember that obviously some of the relatives of these people were in my constituency as well. And I made it very clear, these are not martyrs. My Islam teaches me, these are not martyrs going to heaven. These are sinners likely going somewhere else. You know, and there is a lot of Islamophobia out there without a shadow of a doubt. And I've got to just make a small plug, because what I noticed here in Cape Town is that the Muslims here really love their country. And they should. But I love my country as well in the UK. And I just want to tell you very briefly why I think it's probably the best country in the world to live as a Muslim. Look, when 9/11 happened, there was a huge backlash against Muslims in the US. To this day, they're suffering. I don't want to go on about that. I can say that in the US. But I think people will know that. And you can see how the president behaves now and the kind of things that he's saying. You know, in 7/7, we were fearful there would be a backlash against Muslims. Alhamdulillah, it didn't really materialize at all in the way that people expected. And let me just give you a hypothetical example, just to be slightly provocative, which is very unusual for me. You know, imagine 7/7 happened in Pakistan, and that the bombers call themselves Christians. You know, in the first year, how many Christians may have died? I don't know. It's hypothetical, but 50, 100, 1,000, I don't know. I'm just making us think in a different way. But we don't have to be hypothetical. Let's go to a real-life example. In 2002, Indian state of Gujarat, 50 Hindu pilgrims die on a train. Nobody knows what caused the fire on that train where those innocent pilgrims died. But the response was over 3,000 Muslims butchered in the state of Gujarat, women raped, businesses looted. To this day, some of my constituents, or in the next constituency, Batley, were killed. One survived. They stabbed them all, they burnt them alive, but by the grace of God, one underneath managed to survive. They thought they'd kill them all. And so I, for a long time, have tried to fight for justice for some of these people. But in the UK, 7/7 happens, alhamdulillah, we're not the US. You know, when I go to the US, no disrespect, Donald, but then I run back to the UK. When I go to Europe, I run back to the UK. When I go to the Muslim world, I run back to the UK, because the rights and privileges we have are second to none. And you know, let me give you something else which I think is really relevant to South Africa as well. The leader of the British National Party, Nick Griffin, he was once doing an interview near to me. They asked us to do an interview together. On principle, I said, no, I won't do an interview with him, so they interviewed us separately. He said one thing. He said, do you realise that the British in 50 years are going to be a minority in their own country? Yeah? Now, firstly, statistically, that isn't true. Secondly, even if it was, should it be a problem? I don't believe, and you can take this analogy and apply it in South Africa however you wish, I don't believe you've got to be white and racist to feel uncomfortable about the potential transition from being a majority to being a minority. Why? Because I think we all know that more often than not, the lot of a minority isn't usually a happy lot. And that's why it's so important in South Africa, in the UK, and elsewhere, we create a society where the rights and responsibilities each of us has is the same as the other. And if we can create that society, then it doesn't matter if you're majority or minority, they're just labels. Because ultimately, you will have the same rights, you will have the same privileges. Importantly, you will have the same responsibilities. You can't take rights and privileges and ignore responsibilities. So I think I've given us three challenges collectively. One is complacency, one is relative unity. I think the other one is about the conflation between Islam and extremism and terrorism. I think another great example which just reinforces what I've just said. I don't know if you remember this, that it was the most twittered kind of thing. It was trending maybe 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. And there was a guy at a tube station who was allegedly a Muslim, and he had a knife and he was just willingly just trying to slash people. And there's one guy there, and he shouted at him, he said, "You ain't no Muslim, bruv." Yeah? "You ain't no Muslim, bruv." He shouted this at the guy, and it's caught and everywhere. And of course, many people thought, well, this guy must be a Muslim. But he wasn't a Muslim. His name was John. And this is what he said. He said, "People look at Muslims and look at ISIS and think they're all the same, but obviously they're not. I know Muslims. I know Muslims. I've got Muslim friends. I was just a bit upset with what I saw. I had to let him know how I felt." Imagine if he never had Muslim friends. Huh? Perhaps he wouldn't have said any of that stuff. But this is the power. We underestimate the power of simple things. We look for complex solutions to tough problems. There is no need for complex solutions. It's simple. Follow your deen. Be an ambassador. Helpful to everybody irrespective of religion. Work on the basis of meritocracy. What's important is what you know, not who you know. And inshallah, all things will come. It's not complex. We look for these very smart solutions in this smart world in which we live, which is not as enlightened as we'd like to believe it is. But actually the solutions are infinitely more simple. And they don't cost much money. You know, you see somebody that's different, normally maybe you don't smile at them, today you smile. That day that person will go home and think, "That's interesting, I got a smile." You're changing the world very, very slowly. It doesn't take much. And I perhaps will give one or two more quick examples and then I'll wind up pretty quick. Hello to Solly Adam from Dewsbury. Some of his relatives are in the audience today, I was just told. One of the other challenges that we have, and it's a big challenge, please don't underestimate this challenge. Look, none of us can control the provocation. When somebody provokes you, you can't control it. You've been provoked. You didn't influence it, you didn't ask for it, you didn't invite it, but you've been provoked. So you can't control that bit. That bit is outside your gift. That bit is outside your power ambit. But what you can control is your reaction. Now, if you think for a second, let's take the cartoon controversy, which everybody will be familiar with. I don't have to go into the ins and outs of that, where a Danish cartoonist drew this ugly caricature and suggested that it's somebody who is very dear to us. Obviously, nothing could be further from the truth. But let me put it this way. If that cartoonist is indeed an Islamophobe, if the cartoonist is an Islamophobe, I tell you, today, he is the happiest Islamophobe in the world. He drew a stupid cartoon that took him 5 minutes. 139 Muslims were killed across the world. Hotels, businesses looted, burned. Wow. Is that all it takes? Huh? Is that all it takes? We can't control the provocation, but we can control the reaction. And dare I say, had we perhaps not reacted in the way we did to a very mediocre writer who would have gone nowhere quick, then today Salman Rushdie would not be the hero of the free, liberal, literal or literacy world. Very average writer who was going nowhere fast. And yet we propelled him. Not us, but some people propelled him. We need to learn from those lessons. They didn't do it for bad reasons. Look, the intention was not bad. But only a fool thinks only about intention. Most sensible people think about what is going to be the outcome. What is going to be out? If the outcome is going to be damaging, why would I do it? Of course I wouldn't do it. And so this is another challenge, provocation and reaction. I'm going to wind up now, not wind you up, but just wind up by saying 2 or 3 quick things. Firstly, tolerance. People speak about tolerance. In the UK, we're a tolerant society. In South Africa, we're a tolerant society. Put your tolerance in the bin. Yeah? Tolerance is fickle. And it's, you know, when you cut yourself, you tolerate the pain. If you miss a train, you tolerate the wait. This is not a positive experience. We need to move to something which is much deeper than tolerance, which is acceptance of difference, acceptance of one another. What does that mean? That means when those hard times come, you won't need to depend on tolerance, because you'll have acceptance, which is much deeper and much more difficult to break. You know, it was Martin Luther King who said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And let me tell you, prosperity is not sustainable, while poverty is a reality for many others. And so for those who are affluent, by helping others, of course, we're doing what we ought to be doing as Muslims, but we're also helping ourselves as well. These things are not mutually exclusive. There was a British philosopher and parliamentarian who said that for evil to prevail, all that's required is that good people do nothing. And of course there's a hadith which says if you see something wrong, firstly you try to physically stop it. If you can't physically stop it, then verbally you try to stop it. If you can't verbally stop it, then inside you think it's a bad thing. But this third form is the lowest form of Iman. And let me just finish off, this is the 6th finish, so it's usually the last one. Just finish off with an anecdote, which is an anecdote about, and just to prove that it's the last one, look, I'm even folding up. It's an anecdote about being positive when faced with profound negativity. I was part of a UN Human Rights and Educational delegation as a student in Israel and Palestine in 1993. You can say I don't look old enough, and I'd thank you for that. I was very young at the time. And it was day 7, and we were in the Gaza Strip. And the Oslo Peace Accord had just been announced. And when something like that happens and you're in that country, you can't understand if this is a big deal, is it real, not real. Remember, we didn't have the internet and everything else we have. We just had, in the UK, the 9 o'clock news. That told me what was going on in the world. And so I didn't really know if this was a big deal or not. I thought maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And we sat with a chap called Jabal, who was the most senior PLO official at the time. At that time, Arafat was in exile in Tunis, and the delegates were in New York. And this camera crew came busting in, and they thrust a mic in Jabal's face, and they said to him, "This peace, people are saying that it's nothing, and the PLO have sold out. What do you say to that charge?" And Jabal composed himself, and he said, "You're right, it is nothing. But the Palestinian people have never even been offered nothing before. And we're going to take this nothing, and we're going to build something from it." And I would say that, look, the tunnel sometimes is long, the tunnel sometimes is dark, but to get through the tunnel, we need to focus on the light at the other end. And I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of light in this mosque here today. Inshallah, may it continue to be as bright as it possibly can. Jazakallah khair. Thank you.